I am indeed delighted to be here today and to introduce our wonderful panel. First of all, to my left, Lisa Yee is the author of 10 novels for young readers, including Millicent Min, Girl Genius, and Bobby vs. Girls Accidentally. Her next novel, The Kidney Hypothetical, or How to Ruin Your Life in 7 Days, will be published in April. Next to her, Sonia Manzano is the author of the young adult novel The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano, as well as 2 picture books. She spent over 30 years as an actress on Sesame Street, and her memoir will also be published by Scholastic in the fall of 2015. Sharon Robinson is the author of 6 books for children, most recently the picture book Under the Same Sun. Her next book is a middle grade novel that's based on a true story of Stephen Satlow, a boy who knew her father, Jackie Robinson, and that'll be out in fall 2015 as well. And at the end, Varian Johnson is the author of The Great Green Heist, which was published in June, as well as 3 other novels for children and young adults. He is also a certified engineer, so if you have any math questions, they are all going to him. But more than math, we are here today to talk about how books and publishing can better serve our increasingly diverse world, and especially the diverse students that all of you teach. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the work of Walter Dean Myers, a wonderful author whom we lost in June. And he said once, "I started to exist when I started to read." So I'd like to start by asking our panel, what books first made you exist as a child and brought you to love reading? And in particular, what was the first time when you recognized yourself in a book?
I'll start. You mentioned Walter, and Sharon and I were just talking about him. He just passed away. Walter passed away a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago now. And when I found out, I bawled, I cried. And I was at lunch eating barbecue. So it's a strange feeling. But for me, I first came to see myself in Walter's books. Specifically, I remember reading Motown and Dee Dee by Walter Dean Myers and Sweet Whispers, Brother Rush by Virginia Hamilton. And I remember seeing characters that looked like me, and I remember realizing these were authors that looked like me that wrote these books too. As someone who has always wanted to be an author, I never really saw a path for me to get there. I didn't realize that I could do that, and seeing these books about characters that looked like me, written by people that looked like me, was refreshing. It just, things clicked, and I realized that maybe I could do it after all.
And Varian and I had the opposite childhood in that, wait a minute, I don't...
Let's slide it up.
Okay, I said I had the opposite childhood where I didn't have books written by Black authors, and I didn't have... So we had, See Spot Run, and then moving on up from there. So actually my first, but I did find a girl character in, now, this 60-year-old brain or 64-year-old brain, I just knew the author's name, and then I wrote Judy Blume down. So now all I can think of is Judy Blume. But it was the, what are the mysteries? Nancy Drew. Oh, jeez, not Judy Blume. Thank you. Yeah, that was the first time I got excited about books because I was an adventurous little girl, and so at least she was white, but at least she was adventuresome, and so that was, but that's why I love the Motown era, because we also didn't have music for Black kids in my community. So when Motown comes around, so it's just like books, Motown comes around, we're like, oh my God, somebody gets us, and it's very exciting.
I have to say that the book that made the most impression on me was When I Was Puerto Rican by Esmeralda Santiago, because it was really the first time that I read a story that had to do with someone who was like me, who was Puerto Rican and who lived in New York City, and even though she had very close ties to the island and I did not, when she came here, her experience of finding this other culture so overwhelming and how she managed was something that I could certainly relate to. But I think the first book that I really loved was Charlotte's Web. And that was introduced to me by a 5th grade teacher, Mr. Gitterman. And I remember his name because I remember this book so vividly. And it always comes to mind in our times now of I know you're all teachers and you all have certain information you have to get across and certain data that you have to compile. In those days, a teacher could give you a gift. He had the time, and he gave us Charlotte's Web. That certainly wasn't in his curriculum, but those were more relaxed times about that, and individual teachers could give individual gifts, and that was his to me, and it keeps on giving.
When I was growing up, can you hear me? Okay. I really identified with Sidney Taylor's All of a Kind family books, and believe it or not, I'm not Jewish, but there were no books about Asian Americans when I was a kid. And these stories were like the turn of the century, these large Jewish families. But I identified with it because I think, the closeness of the family, and they ate these weird foods and, all that kind of stuff together. And I remember, I told my parents that I wanted to become Jewish.
How did that go over?
My mom's like, okay. But see, the thing was that any book I read, I identified with the characters. And so when I read those, I wanted to have these sisters, and I wanted to be Jewish, and I wanted to eat this weird fish, and grow up in New York at the turn of the century. And then later on, when I read the Katie John books by Mary Calhoun, I thought, okay, that's me too, because she's this misunderstood tomboy. And that's who I thought it was. And that's how it was with me growing up. I would identify with the character, and then I would want to be them.
Yeah.
Let me just add to that. I had the same experience with A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, which is
Love that.
Irish-American family turn of the century in Brooklyn, and they had an experience where they lied to the authorities where they lived so their child could go to a better school. And I knew 4 families in my neighborhood who did the same thing. So even though she was so different from me culturally, the fact that the families did the same thing sort of connected us.
Sonia.
We know who you meant.
I grew up watching Sesame Street. That was bound to happen at some point during this panel. You talked about Mr. Gitterman and what a great role he played in helping you to discover literature, and also like some of the challenges you see facing teachers and librarians now. When you all go on school visits or you talk to school staff, what are some of the other things you hear about connecting students with literature or the problems they're facing?
It's always a problem of time is, one of the issues that, teachers, we all face, is how to get it all in. But what I've loved in some of my school visits is seeing how the teachers and the principal have worked together to have the kids form committees to deal with social issues. And I think that that's fascinating because they have to then come up with their own, these little committees come up with their own solution, and they're all student run with a teacher, a faculty or teacher assistant.
So they really empower. Those kids.
It really empowers them, and I was fascinated also with because they also choose what topics they feel are their social issue ones, and I find that kind of fascinating. When sixth graders are defining what are the problems of our society, and there's so many of them, but they choose their top priorities.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting. I used to teach a college course for teachers about children's literature, and we had a lot of topics about what happens when you're in your classroom and what books you can bring in, because there's limited time, certainly. There's limited books you can push, and also, depending where you are, there's sometimes pushback on what those books are. So, we talked about books that kind of covered the biggest spectrum, but weren't too, provocative, weren't too questionable is not the word I'm looking for, but one basically caused a ruckus, which is dangerous because you never know what type of book a reader needs, and there is no one perfect book that will touch all these different people, these different reader here or reader there. But it's a challenge. I do think a lot of teachers are worried about school boards coming down. Books are being challenged all the time. I've certainly been disinvited for some of my YA books. I don't have a solution for it, but I know it's a challenge, and I am glad that certainly public libraries sometimes have a little bit more flexibility than school libraries, and they can stock things a little bit easier. I know for us, when I was growing up, there were times where my school librarian would say, well, we don't have that book, but I know they have it at the Florence County Public Library. Why don't you go down there and check it out? And I would.
I think that's a really great point. I'm afraid sometimes that in our efforts to present perfect African American characters or upstanding Latino characters, our characters can be boring, and nobody wants to read it, and the kids can smell it a mile away that it's this is supposed to be good for me book, and they don't want to read those kind of books, whereas so it kind of prevents authors from coming up with the Latino Diary of a Wimpy Kid that would never fly in the Latino market, the Diary of a Juan Bobo, even though there is that character in Latin culture, people say, oh no, you can't show a Latino boy that's a wimp. He's got to be a doctor. So that those books, and I think because I'm saying that we should watch out that our absolutely correct interest in showing positive characters of color don't get in the way of making them totally boring to the reader that we're trying to excite.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think one of the best compliments I get are when a kid has read one of my books, for example, Stanford Wong Flunk's Big Time, about a Chinese American boy. And I get, kids of all races coming up to me saying, I identify with him. And they identify with the character and who he is and not what his DNA is. And I think in terms of school visits, what I love about it is that the students get to see who I am. Because when I was growing up, we didn't have school visits, we didn't have computers, that's how old I am.
Right.
So I thought that all authors were dead people. I mean, you don't know who you assume. I thought that they were all dead people, and so when I go to schools, they can see, well, there is actually a person behind that story. And even if you can't have an author come to your school, you can Skype or websites, and I answer all my email when a student, no, I'm not gonna go loud, but I do, when a student writes to me, when someone writes to me, I answer everything, because I think it's really important for students to realize that there is someone behind those words, behind those books that they're enjoying or hating.
Right.
And by the way, with school starting right now, I'm getting a lot because of summer assignments that kids haven't completed. And sometimes
None
they'll
of your students, right?
and sometimes they'll just send me all the questions and say, this is due tomorrow, can you do this?
Well, I'm having the opposite issue right now in the book I'm working on, because it's a 8-year-old Jewish boy in 1948 from Brooklyn. And I was in a panic, and I know this man. I've known him all my life, but he's a man now. He's a real person. And we spent a lot of time talking about what his childhood was like. But I am finding it actually, just a joy to get into his voice. And it is fun to be able to think like a, totally different child than I, raised. When I was working on my jumper book, I had a scene where I was talking about your idea of how good to show all of our characters. So I had a scene where it was a gang scene, and the boy gets stabbed, and he falls out, and the other kids, it's a warning to the other kids that be careful. And I was telling my son about this, and he said, "Mom, that is so stereotypical. Couldn't he doesn't have to get stabbed." So I'm now saying, oh, well, maybe, I'm taking it a little too far. And that's what my son felt. I was taking a little, you could get that same point across that they hurt this boy without him getting stabbed. So, as a writer, I don't know how far you actually take it into a realistic
How did you
setting
end the
of half
scene?
writing.
Did he just get punched or something, or?
Yeah, he gets punched and gets pushed out of the bushes instead. Now, it's been with my editor for a while, so I don't know. He may be dead by the time you see the book.
Or your editor might say, "Why didn't you have him get stabbed?"
Dramatic effect. Well, going off that idea of troublemaking characters, both Lisa and Varian, you've written novels with, like you mentioned Stanford Wong Flunk's Big Time, which is about an Asian kid who then flunks, which is completely,
Unacceptable?
and like Varian, The Great Green Heist is basically like Ocean's 11 in middle school, and so we've got the wonderful Jackson Green who's at the center of this heist to steal the school election, and so. When we talk about these stories in publishing, we often talk about them as stories about characters who just happen to be a certain color because they are stories that could appeal to kids all across the spectrum because they have such great central plots. Could you talk a little bit about the layers that you see that you bringing to your novel in writing these non-stereotypical stories and also great stories, and a little bit about that phrase "just happens to be"?
I think Lisa should go first. I can go first.
When I first started writing, I just wrote about kids who were like me, and I'm a third-generation Chinese American. So, in my home, growing up, in our silverware drawer, there were forks and there were chopsticks. And that's just what it happened to be. And my grandparents came over, and my grandmother spoke Chinese to me. I don't speak Chinese, but I understood her, and she understood me. And to me, that was the way things were. And so when I started writing my first book, which was Millicent Min, Girl Genius, that girl just happened to be Chinese American like I was. And then Stanford, a companion story, came out the same way. And when I was writing his, I realized that there was kind of this stereotype of overachieving Asians, but not every Asian is overachieving. And there are lots of kids who don't get good grades, but people are look at them like there's something wrong with them because, well, you're Asian. You're supposed to get A's. What's your problem? Yeah. And so I wanted to write about him and how he felt about that, because even his father was you have to get A's because you have to do this for the family, because this is what we do. And he wants to play basketball. And that's all he wants to do is play basketball. And so I thought I would write about how it would feel for a kid to have this pressure on him that, he just happened to be born into this race and into this family, but that's not who he is. His race does not define him. Yeah. And so I wrote about that story. And like I said earlier, when I hear from kids, and I hear from a lot of boys, especially from that book, they're like, well, he's exactly like me. And I love hearing he's exactly like me. And these are kids who are white, who are black, who are Hispanic, just all different races, identifying with him so much. Because I think what you do is when you write a character, you write about them first. You don't say, I am going to write about race. You are going to learn a lesson. You write about a character, and you write full-bodied about that character. And if you do it right, an understanding of them and their race or their issues or whatever will follow. But that's what you have to do to, engage your readers, to write a compelling character.
Absolutely.
In my character in The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano is a young Puerto Rican girl coming of age in 1969 in El Barrio, when the Young Lords were taken over, and she kind of gets in touch with her Latino roots because she struggles with being Puerto Rican and has self-hatred and doesn't, shies away from it. And so that's sort of on one level, but the other, on another level, she's stuck between her grandmother and her mother, and she doesn't know which one to follow or which one of them she should be like. So I think that a girl stuck between her grandmother and her mother, all girls go through. I think that that was the universal kind of bit that that was important to me, that I have it in, that I have in the book, like Nia Vardalos, who wrote the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding. She says how she hated being Greek because she was the only 8-year-old with sideburns in her class. So I wanted to touch into that sort of humorous part of a girl not liking who she was, because I felt that a lot of girls, in addition to getting the historical aspect of those times that were meaningful to me.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more thing about Stanford's story, and that he is very close to his grandmother, and he loves her very much. And you know, and now I'm going to be stereotypical, but in Asian families, you know, grandparents are very important, and so they play an important role in my books. But his grandmother makes this wonderful dim sum, which Stanford loves. It's his comfort food, and yet when she makes it for his lunch, he throws it away, because he's embarrassed. He doesn't want people at his school to know that he's eating this weird stuff. And so he would rather not eat than have his friends see that he's eating this dim sum.
Mm-hmm. It's the fried chicken story in our culture. You know, whether the fried chicken's going to come through the bag and you have a greasy bag and everybody can smell your fried chicken. But anyway. You know, I love layers, and I think that's part of the fun of writing, whether it's a contemporary book or a historical fiction or Under the Same Sun, which takes place in another country. So I always try to, and I probably layer my books too much because I'm always layering with you know, the character stuff, but you know, since I work with kids on overcoming obstacles, all of my characters, whether they're real people I know or if they're my fictional ones, they all have to have obstacles that they have to overcome in their lives. And most of that comes from, you know, 18 years of reading essays from kids and meeting them, you know, that have overcome some, across the country, have overcome some tough, really tough stuff, and some, you know, things that you think of every day, but they're all obstacles. But I think I learned to love layers because when I was growing up, we had a library in our house, you know, and so being the only black girl in my school, I didn't have all these wonderful teachers that I can talk about from my elementary school years. But in my house, the library was such a special place. And it was special because we had a whole set of encyclopedias. And so I learned very early, you know, if I had a project, Mom and I would, you know, go through our encyclopedias. Or I remember the phase where I wanted a horse. You know, my mother, you know, my mother makes you study everything, you know, so I had to, you know, I didn't know every type of horse and, you know, and draw them. And, you know, I didn't get the horse. No, I eventually didn't get it. My brother got the horse, but, you know, go visit them and all. But so I always think in terms of layers. And I love that. I was working on a scene in Steve's story, and I had to look up 1948 Hanukkah, you know, to see exactly what day it fell on and, you know, what the weather was like and all this kind of stuff. And it drew me over to the Arab-Israeli War. And I was like, oh my God, I've been talking about all these things that happened in 1948, and I forgot to talk about, you know, the fact somehow we got to bring that into the story. So again, that's another layer that just makes it so very interesting to me.
This idea of layers is really interesting. I think we are layered as people, and we have to remember that when it comes to our books. You know, I am Varian Johnson, a male African-American author that grew up in South Carolina, that was yada, yada, yada. All of these things influence who I am, and I try to think about that when I'm writing as well. So for The Great Green Heist, there are certain layers, there are certain things that are going to be more prominent throughout the story. When I came to the idea of writing it, I was very specific. I wanted to write a diverse story. I wanted to write a story that represented the schools that I was going to talk, going to the classrooms. I love heist movies, and there's this great scene at the end of Ocean's 13 where you had the three main characters kind of sitting back in the airport with their coats on, leaning back because the con is over. And I thought, that's a great scene. Those are the three coolest, whitest looking dudes I've ever seen. And I thought, well, why can't a story like this be diverse? Where, you know, race importance, but everything is important. It's all about layers. There are times where, throughout the book, where that may be more prevalent, times where it may not be. I think it's important to remember for all of us, there's, our race does not always define us. Certainly there are times where it's going to be very prevalent in what we're thinking and how we're reacting, and sometimes it's not. The way I approach the Great Green Heist, I wanted to keep that in mind. There are times where it's prevalent, times where it's not, but it just balances the characters to try to make them somewhat three-dimensional. So.
Let me add something, one more layering thought, and that is that the child who reads the book will bring his own layer to what he's reading. And hopefully as teachers, teachers will entertain those ideas that maybe you don't think are suggested in the book. Getting back to Charlotte's Web, I came from an environment where women had many children, and I observed that often the women were under the control is too harsh a word, but they had to sort of do what the men in their family told them to do. They were powerless against the men in their family, and they had all those children. So when I read Charlotte's Web, I thought Wilbur was a big load, and and Charlotte had to take care of him in addition to having 20 billion kids every month or something, whatever her life was. She had to take care of him. So it was an example of not probably what the author intended, but that was how my take on it. And I would assume that a kid from Colombia or from Pakistan will read that story and somehow bring his or her life into it, and that's just as valid as actually that's what we want to books to take you someplace else.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that, when I write a book, when I'm finished writing a book, it doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to the reader, and it's whatever they take from it or bring to it. It's not mine. I was just the person that put it out there, and now it belongs to them.
Yeah. Sonia, you started talking about the interpretations of readers from around the world, which is, of course, a challenge that New York City's teachers face, especially because they work with such a range of kids from all sorts of cultures and countries. What sort of challenges, or better put, how can teachers better help students who have English as a second language nurture their own writing talent and bring out their own reading gifts?
It's very difficult. There are so many organizations that are devoted to helping kids read, and I always volunteer for all of them if they ask me to and if I'm available. So I always think, why aren't kids reading? So there's so much effort being put into this idea. So that's a really tough question. I'm not going to, presume to answer that, but I will say that maybe if kids start, if it's not on the written page, maybe you could start with oral stories. Maybe they could just tell you stories, or you can just tell them stories. I'm resurrecting Mr. Gitterman again, because he said to the class after he read Charlotte's Web, your parents should read to you stories every day. Well, that was not going to happen in my household. As a matter of fact, they thought reading was a lazy endeavor when you could have been doing something worthwhile. Huh. Like washing dishes or something, but help out. But so I said that to my mother. She says, we don't have any books. I went back to Gitterman, and he said, well, she doesn't have to have books. She could just tell you stories of her life. So I went back to her and I said, Mr. Gitterman said that you could just tell me stories. And then she did. And then I learned a lot about her that I didn't know when she told me about her life in Puerto Rico and what that was like. But I think that began my love of stories and hearing stories of other people. To get to the printed page was a little bit later. And that might be a way of getting kids interested in the idea of a tale.
Yeah, we had a situation like this. We do the Break and Embarrass program with Scholastic and Major League Baseball, but in schools, it's school-based. But we also do it through our baseball program. And our baseball program has teams from the Caribbean and South America. And every year we have an essay contest, and it's a nice prize. They get a really beautiful laptop computer. So, it's a coveted prize, and, I presented to them at this special dinner, and so they get recognition. Anyway, every year we would get from the Dominican kids, we would get a book report written in Spanish about my father.
Huh.
And it was like, and this is so ridiculous that it took us so long to find a simple solution. So one of our staff went to the Dominican Republic, met with the coach, and had them agree to translate the rules, the essay contest rules, so that into Spanish. Then he said he would translate their essays into English. And so for the first year this year, we had a winner from the Dominican. And it was so special. So I had the coach come up and actually read the essay and talk both in Spanish and English to, announce the winner. And it made us all feel so good because we had alienated a whole group of kids. I mean, it's teams. So it's 20 kids. Every year they'd sit at this dinner and look around not knowing what's going on. It was, so sometimes it's a very simple solution that can make a huge difference in a child's life. You're bringing them into the conversation, yeah.
That's great.
And, in our effort to, because I have 2 kids, my grandchildren are part Brazilian, and their mother is English, she's just learning English. So we have it at home, too. How do I not overcorrect my grandchildren, because then it makes my daughter-in-law, feel like I'm somehow challenging, but I can't stand it when they put ED on the end of every word and decide that's the past tense. I say, Lucas, because my Lucas is 9, so I always do it to Lucas. Lucas, there is no such word. Yes, there is. No, there is no such word, Lucas, and you want to learn how to say this word correctly. But it's, and she's now trying to get her GED. So you need to bring families along, because she is talking to her children and trying to learn English at the same time and teaching them incorrectly, and they want to follow her. So as teachers, I can imagine, I have just 3 people in my family like this. So I can imagine if you got a whole class, where you've got the parents at home, speaking one language, or partial English, and the kids have to come and learn it, So it is a really big challenge. So good luck. Keep me posted.
Then you have comics like John Leguizamo making a career of saying things like, it was ironical, or expected it.
One thing I do like that I've seen recently over the past 5 years, let's say, is that it's cool to be smart now. I think you see more and more that it's cool to be techie, to be a little geeky. Geeks aren't as ostracized as they were certainly when I was growing up. And I think that's encouraging folks to read and to engage in some of these other technical avenues as well, too. It's cool to be smart, which I think is awesome.
When my parents are both teachers, LA Unified, and when I was growing up, my mother would read to me every night before bed. And when I learned how to read, I would read to her every night before bed. And I remember if I was lucky and she was exhausted, she would fall asleep, and I could keep reading. So I would just sit there, and she'd be sleeping in my bed, and I'd keep reading out loud. But, it goes both ways. So, yes, if there is a parent or an adult or someone in the household who can read to the child, but once that student is old enough to read, they can read to their brothers, their sisters, their neighbors, their parents. They can read, too. It can go both ways.
And that facility, long-term, helps create our future readers and our future writers for the books that we're making.
I also love, in Florida, we do have one of our literacy programs. You talk about these literacy programs, because a big issue is, like, what do you do with the children, so you can go to these programs that are in the evening. Parents can go
and learn English.
So in Florida, they actually have a whole system, and I hate to join my politics here. It's actually Jeb Bush. his organization, but we won't mention that. But anyway, but they do have a wonderful literacy program, and I attribute that to Barbara, not to Jeb. Barbara's upbringing, raising her children right, and teaching them about literacy. But they actually bring the entire family. So when you come for your GED classes or your English as a second language classes, they have activities for the kids. They have food. They provide dinner, and just make it very accessible. And I think that more of our literacy programs need to think about the whole family and how to make it possible that you can actually spend an evening and all learn at the same time.
Well, we're going to open it up to audience questions in just a minute. You'll be able to come down here to these microphones here or here. But I'd like to round this off by asking all of our panelists if you could offer one piece of advice to aspiring young writers out there now that these teachers can share with their students, or one piece of advice to teachers of writing. What would you say? What would you like these writers and teachers to take away?
I would say read, write, read, write, and read. I mean,
in that order?
Yeah. No, wait. Read, write. Yeah.
Yeah.
I say that, and I also often tell teachers that editors are just like your English teacher. They put little red marks and things on your paper, but how much I learned from those red marks, and so then it starts staying in your head. So you don't need a red mark; it's there. So I guess I would say that to kids that appreciate the feedback you get from teachers and try to, so you're starting to self-correct on your next paper, your next project.
Think of it as a process, maybe more so than like right or wrong. Right.
When a person writes something and they refuse to rewrite it, I always think, you're not a writer. I think writing is rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, and it's like polishing a stone. And until you get the story exactly how you want it. And so to add to read and doing a lot of reading, don't be afraid to rewrite. It's so easy with computers. You just cut and paste.
And with writing, I think it's important to read as widely as possible. I think often we think we like a certain type of story, so that's all we want to read. But you don't know what you like until you try it. So I think you owe it to yourself as a reader to try contemporary versus fantasy versus science fiction. Just, the wide range, nonfiction, memoir. It's amazing what will encourage you and what little spark here will, drive your writing over there.
Well, thank you so much, everybody. This has been a great conversation. Thank you. I really enjoyed this. And if you'd like, I see we have our ladies with microphones here. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll call on you, and we can. Somebody right here.
Can you tell us where do you write? Where are you writing?
Where are you writing is the question.
You mean like physically?
Yeah.
Right now. The ideas are coming at all times. I have an office in my house that I write in, but I also have just this past year started going to coffee shops and things like that, because if you're there and you're on Facebook, people can see, and so you're shamed into not doing that, and you have to actually write. But I travel a lot. I actually do a lot of writing in hotel rooms too.
Your editors can also see when you're on Facebook quite often if you're friends with them.
Remind me to block you.
I think we actually shamed you about this once. We're like, get off Facebook, Lisa.
Yeah, and by the way, there is a thing called antisocial, so you can block yourself from the interwebs, as I call them, when you write. So.
I use that too, actually. Yeah.
Oh, I with laptops, you can write anywhere. I just write anywhere. I write in airports, in the living room, in the bedroom, wherever. It's really a great convenience, and we should take advantage of it.
I totally agree with everybody. We write everywhere, and I love coffee shops. I actually like to edit in them. I don't know. I like the voices around. It keeps me. I like to write in quiet, but I like to edit in with voices. And I think we all have a space, a designated space, because you do need some structure. And you need, when you get ready to go print it out, you have to print. So yes, we can travel wherever with our laptops, but we'd like to have a. Now I live with my 2 grandchildren and 3 dogs, so I recently put up a wall and with doors, so I do have a place to go and hide from my loving, wonderful family.
I have an office at home as well, and I write there. I also have a 3-month-old at home. So there's often times where I'll strap her on, and I'll stand up, and I'm writing while I'm rocking. So wherever I could find the space and time.
You have like a standing desk?
No, the counter. The counter.
You just rock her
Just
in the
rock.
chair and.
Rock. I stand and rock. Walk while I'm thinking. Come back, type for about 20 minutes. She starts crying again. Walk again. She's almost out of that. Not quite. So.
I also write on the elliptical machine. I know that sounds weird, and I'm not like on a keyboard, but while I'm exercising, for some reason, a lot of ideas come to me, and so I have a notebook and little pieces of scraps of paper, and I can always tell how successful an exercise session has been by the number of pieces of paper that are on the floor around me, because, I wasn't kidding when I say I write everywhere, because you never know when idea is going to hit you, and I always carry a notebook with me, wherever I go to.
Yeah.
Or a napkin.
Another question. This lady in the middle right there.
Here, can we pass the mic?
I think we've got a mic coming to you.
Hello, good morning. As you write, do you make illustrations to see where your story is going, like little notes or illustrations to work the story through?
You mean like an outline?
Like maybe a little outline, some drawings to see how you want the story to flow, just to get a visual in your mind.
Well, I've never done that, but that sounds like a great idea. It sounds like
Will now.
Storyboarding a little movie or something with a visual.
I'm actually working with a novelist named Daniel Jose Older, who has written this awesome fantasy novel coming out next summer, set in Brooklyn. It's called Shadow Shaper, and it's about this girl in Bed-Stuy who discovers like this fantasy world, this fantasy power that like came over with her family from Puerto Rico, and when we were going through the editorial process, he brought in these little storyboards that he'd made where he'd actually sketched out like a fight scenes and things that the characters were having, and we would rearrange those scenes. So it's like rearranging clips of a movie to see how the story would flow, and that was really useful to him. Yeah.
Yeah, I like storyboards, but I've never done them
With your own projects?
No, I've never done them with pictures. I do them with words, just a few,
Like an outline that you then rearrange?
No, I do actually little squares, and I put the main points that I want to cover in each, and I do the same thing. I may flip the squares in different places around, but so I don't have the same visual, but I need a visual, so I tend to have my storyboard so I can see it, and it's not an outline because I do an outline, but once I've done it, I may not look at it too much.
Right.
But my storyboard, it's kind of up there, and I say, oh yeah, I did that work. It's interesting how it ended up at the same place as my storyboard. I'm always surprised if the story flows in that same direction, even though it's been structured in the storyboard.
Yeah.
I don't sketch and draw, but what I do a lot of is research when I write. And for example, I wrote a book called Warp Speed about this Star Trek geek who gets beat up every day. And in the book, there's this one scene where in a classroom, the kids have garbage bags and they make costumes. And so he wants to make a Batman costume. So what I did was I researched Batman and I put pictures of Batman on there, so when I wrote, I could look at the picture to make sure that it was correct. And I'll do that a lot when I write. Like if a kid is living in a certain house or a certain area, I might Google, certain houses like that and put the pictures up there so I can have a visual reference when I write.
A lot of writers use Pinterest for that, I think. No. Yeah.
Love Pinterest.
Yeah.
Except they don't
Right, thank you.
have secret boards.
Someone else? The lady in blue right there.
Getting back to the point that's really important for the child to identify with the character, I thought a really good point was the oral stories, because I find as though struggling readers, as their maturity level grows, the content of the books, I think as teachers, I think we all have that issues. Is there any other recommendations that you might have?
For how to better match readers who may be struggling, but then
Yeah.
like they may be older readers, but the stories
so
are
the
too
connection
sophisticated.
gets lost per se, and that's where I think, at least I do have a problem having them identify with the characters as much, or the stories, or really have that love for reading.
Because their reading level may be up here, but the but the reading level may be down here, but the
their
story,
maturity level,
and then
their
the stories
age
are all
level.
about young
Exactly,
kids
and
as
their life
well.
experience might
Right.
be here, and so.
Well, I think as writers, we do take that into consideration. So, for example, I have a book. I have a series, a jumper series, and I have ninth graders that write to me, even though and love this book, even though the writing level is for grades 4 through 4, 5, 6, maybe. But what we did was we aged up the character on the front, and the title is Slam Dunk. So it allows an older reader to feel, like, this is okay that I'm reading this book, because that's your visual, and yet the reading level, could be on a much lower level. I think we're very conscious of trying to write some books that are for kids that are struggling readers, and that's one of the ways we do it.
I wonder if it would be valid to maybe find, in a picture book, find something else in the book that's maybe not the words, but the pictures. An example, let's say Goodnight Moon, because everybody knows that book. If you had a conversation with the child about the different objects and whether they can really sleep and what the sleeping mean, then you're engaging the child in the book, even though you're not really talking about the story in the book, you're talking about other aspects. That might be a little way to get his interest.
I'm blanking on all the titles, but there are a series of books called high-low books, too, that are really made that are, as far as maturity, they're at a higher level, but reading level is a little bit lower. I think Orca Books maybe does some, and I can't, unfortunately, think of any other ones off the top of my head, but that could be an option as well.
Right.
I have actually a question for Cheryl.
Oh, okay.
Put you on the spot. This is just a pet peeve of mine, but she's edited some of my books. No, but I mean, why do publishers limit reading ages? Like they'll say like ages 9 through 12. Why isn't it not 9 and up? Because I think that kids might see it and say, well, I'm 13, I'm 14, I don't want to be seen with that book, so why do you do that?
Well, I wanted to say one thing to the teacher before I address your question, which is that I think graphic novels are a great way to get kids involved too, because the pictures really offer a way to like reaffirm what kids are reading. There's even some wonderful like wordless graphic novels. Like we published a book called The Arrival that has no words, and it's a big thick book, but it's a really great book to involve kids in their reading. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's a question, it's a problem that we wrestle with all the time, because the default assumption in publishing is basically that kids want to read about kids who are their own age or older. And so if you are writing a book for a 9-year-old, the protagonist has to be 9 to 12. If you're writing a book for a 14-year-old, the protagonist has to be 14 or older. And so it creates issues like the one you're discussing where people don't think about writing books for 14-year-olds that might be written more at the level of a 10-year-old, say, even if that's what those particular readers need.
But why is there a cap? I can see,
I think
9 and up.
There's always a cap because, to some extent, I think we are trying to make it easier on readers. Or on parents, because a lot of the parents want to find, what is the right thing? Oh, here is this. This is right because it's just for kids 9 to 12, and my kid is 10, so therefore we will buy it. And they feel reassured by that, by having
we have
strict
to stop
limits.
that. No, I know what you mean,
yeah.
but parents have said to me, it says this age, I can't. I don't want to read it. I like books that are like from 9 to 12, and I'm not 9 or 12. I like a lot of different books, and I think kids. I think they do have the capacity to like a lot of different books, no matter what the label is.
Yeah. It's a problem for us too, because nobody actually has consistent ranges about what a middle grade novel is or what a YA novel is. So I might publish a book with a 15-year-old protagonist, but it's obviously a middle grade book. And so we have these huge long debates in house about which book this should be, what grade it should be.
I was surprised that Catcher in the Rye, which was an adult book, is in a middle grade book sometimes, isn't it? And my niece was reading it when she was in junior high school, and it went, phew. But somehow they decided that because this was about a young guy, she would get it. And it wasn't about that. It was about a lot of other things. So I'm sorry that she missed out on the joy of that book, because it was somebody that decided it was for a young kid, because the character was a young boy.
I hated The Catcher in the Rye when I was 14 or 15, because I was a very uptight, girl in Missouri, and I just did not identify with his rebellious ways at all. And then I moved to New York, and I read it again as an adult, and I was like, oh man, this poor kid. Sometimes you just have to wait till the right age for.
My niece was saying, "You call this rebellious? He wears a cap backwards." That was the big rebellious.
Yeah. And do we have any other questions? Let's see here. I saw her first, but then we'll get you over here. I promise.
I know you touched on it a little bit, but could you share, because I have problems gauging parents to read to their children. Is there any family school connection strategies that you could suggest to get parents involved in reading to their children?
I think that parents are stressed out, and they have a lot of jobs maybe, and they don't have time. So we do something on Sesame Street always did, like teachable moments, so that you do reading within the activities of the day, so the parent doesn't have to go out of their way to read something. So let's say you can tell parents, while you're on the bus, have the kid read the signs, or have them identify, if you're in a car, have them identify the letters in the license plates that go by, so that the parent, it's not like, well, you have to sit down for half an hour and do this special activity, but you can integrate what you're doing during the day that includes letters, and that's kind of a Sesame Street teachable moment technique you might use.
I've heard of schools using the one read, one book technique that somewhat works, where an entire elementary school, or at least certain grades out of that elementary school, will pick one book, and even going so far as a district doing it in Austin, and north of Austin, Round Rock. They picked one there by R.J. Palacio, and I believe all the elementary and middle schools, maybe even all the high schools, were encouraged to read it. And with all that going on within the school, within the businesses, and so on and so forth, it became more widely known. So parents were encouraged to talk to their students about it. When they brought the author in to speak, instead of having the author go to the schools, they did some of that, but they also opened it up and had one huge author event where parents were encouraged to come as well, too. I don't know how well it works, but it's certainly a way to do it by reinforcing that and showing it in multiple ways, not only through the schools, but through newspaper, TV, and such. It encouraged the idea of reading that one book.
And I think we had one more question over here. Oh, I'm sorry, who was the person?
Oh, hi, good morning. I was wondering, I teach in an urban school district in New Jersey, and to address the lady over there, I've ordered books in Spanish, so that my children's parents could read with them, to them, and feel involved. A lot of my students come in the middle of the night with a suitcase, and I've ordered things like The Outsiders in Spanish. Are any of your books, do you happen to know, available in other languages for students of mine whose parents might not be able to follow along in English, but I would want them to keep up with what I'm teaching? Anybody have any books available in Spanish?
Unfortunately, that's not our decision, because I'm sure we would all love to have our books in multiple languages, but so I'd like to know how is that decision made?
It's always a conversation in-house, usually in the publishing house, about which books would have the most appeal cross-culturally. And then, we need to have it translated. We have an editor who does Scholastic in Espanol. And then also books get translated when they are purchased by a Spanish publisher. I've published a number of YA novels by an author named Francisco Stork, and his books are all available in Spanish because they were picked up by an actual publisher in Spain, and they can be ordered here. Yes, here.
I'm sitting here with mixed feelings. I come from an era where there was very little representation of children of color all languages in general, and had to scratch for books to represent students that I taught. So I commend Scholastic for this panel, which I haven't seen in many years of teaching. I've been to writers' conferences, but I've never seen a panel on this level being given for teachers unless it was done through multiculturalism, which I pushed a great deal in the schools that I have taught in, as well as coordinator of multicultural ed. I'm concerned about the competition that we have with the Hunger Games genre, which I love. And of course, there are many issues that come up in several of the books of that ilk. I am at the same time concerned that many books that show our young people how to overcome obstacles are kind of being pushed to the side. This morning's presenter was excellent, where you had a universality of problems that can be addressed through literature. But I am hoping that the book distributors continue in terms of displaying books of multicultural realm and overcoming obstacles in the bookstores. I'm an avid fan of Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com. I mean, I can go on and on. I'm becoming a great fan of Scholastic Bookstore, which okay, I think I'm going to be taking the train over here more frequently because I'm from Queens. But I just wanted to put that out there since we are still talking about representation of how our children in the books. And I don't find these books boring. Many of my students got very engaged in the era of the civil rights movement. We pushed that to the side. And we assume that the hip-hop genre is where they want to go. And that's a bad assumption as well. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, and I was hoping to get a response from any person on the panel.
There's a group called We Need Diverse Books, and if you go on the internet, like Facebook or Twitter, and you hashtag We Need Diverse Books, you'll hear a lot about that. But they had asked a lot of people to just, do a short statement about that. And I made one that said, we need diverse books because the minority kids of today are the majority of tomorrow. And that is absolutely true, that the young kids that we have today, the 1, 2, 3-year-olds, by the time they grow up, they're going to be the majority. And so I think that everybody needs to take heed and note of that, and whether it's an economic situation, like what books sell the most or whatever, we have to pay attention to that, because those readers are going to read everything. And so I think it's short-sighted to think, well, if we're only going to do books where, the protagonist is white because that's who buys the books, the white people are buying. That's not true. It's going to change, and I think that economically, publishers are going to have to, own up to that, and they're going to see, what the buying power is, because that's going to cause a lot of these changes.
Yeah, over the years, I have literally gone into, so we've done this with the Breaking Barriers program. We've gone into schools all over the country, right? And we have a way to reach schools in urban areas, and we all use all these ways to reach them. But I can't tell you how upsetting it is for me to walk into a predominantly black school, and I'll walk in, and the winner is the one white student in the class. So I always say to the teacher, oh, it's interesting. So all of the kids wrote essays, right? Oh, no. No, I picked this one student because they had a challenge. And I go, so all of these kids in this class, she was the only one that had challenges? So it's teachers. I mean, I fight with Major League Baseball. I fight with Scholastic to say to make sure we're always thinking about having a diverse group of kids that are representing the program, and it's I find it at this stage to be really upsetting that people don't totally say, absolutely, just for the first time we had a black boy who was a grand prize winner. I mean, the program's 18 years old. You know what I mean? And I can't be the only one doing the battling, and yet that's what it comes down to. So teachers, you have to feel good buying books with black kids on the cover, or Hispanic kids, or Latin kids, or Asian kids, and not just think of them as being good for the child that looks like them. I mean, these books are good for everybody. They're talking about universal issues, and the kids happen to be of a different color, maybe. And so you have to be as committed to, this multiculturalism as we are as authors or as publishers, are trying to be. I have to say trying, because it's a real problem. It's a real problem. Distributors, our books are as important as any of the other books, so it can't all be about the fantasy. Or we're living in a real world with really serious problems, and kids need to know how to negotiate these problems, and so do parents, because we have to figure it out for how we're going to raise our children. And those books are out there, but if you're not buying them or you're not encouraging all kids to read them, then you're unfortunately not giving them a full picture of the world.
Just to add on really quickly, like Lisa said, the We Need Diverse Books campaign was phenomenal. It really not only pushed the idea of that there are all these diverse books out there, but we need to support them with money. We need to buy those books. And that doesn't always happen. And one other thing, I've been talking about this a lot. The Great Green Heist has certainly benefited a lot from some of this push from the idea we need diverse books. But there's no one person to blame here. I was talking to an author friend. She kept on saying, well, the publishers need to do this. The publishers, and it's their fault. And it's not just their fault. The publisher publish what they are a corporation. They publish what sells books. We as readers have to buy books. We have to support authors. The bookstores have a say in it. Authors have a say in it. We need to be mindful of what we're writing and make sure that our our book worlds are as diverse as the real world. And so I've been very encouraged by this conversation that's been happening, and that all sides are looking at what they can do to make things a little bit better. We have a long way to go, but I honestly think that we're on the right path.
Sonia, do you have anything you'd want to add? Well, I think that's a great place to end with the importance, the role we can all have in this conversation, and sharing these books, buying these books, writing these books, encouraging your kids to read and write our future books. Because, as Lisa said, I think this year is the first year that there are going to be more students of color in American schools than there are white students, and so publishing diversely is going to be how publishing survives in the future. And we want to see more of these books. So I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I'd like to thank our panel again for being